This one is very much going to be looking at, as I say, the origins, and I'll explain why as we get through in a few minutes, because the subject, normally if we take this subject, is why do all Christian religions differ? And this one was entitled Why All Religions Don't Say the Same Thing, so that makes it an even bigger topic. So if we have a look and just lift our minds then for a few minutes about how big is that topic, you can see that overall Christianity has that spread. Globally, Christianity has that spread in terms of where it has its influence. You can see very much into the Americas and into Europe, into the southern part of Africa, into Australia. But the middle swathe, very much occupied by Islamic faiths, with Hinduism and then slowly moving into Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism as you move out into the Far East. So a lot of areas there, and then actually as you get further away from the masses of people, right up into the far north, that's when folk religions are still quite prevalent. So a lot of topics, and too many for us to take overall. So let's look at it in a slightly different way. Wherever you can see a large name, that by some people is coming across as showing you the larger faiths that are in existence. So the larger faiths that exist in terms of number of people, you're talking much more around Buddhism, Christianity, Islam as being the ones with a high degree of influence. And you can see how it works its way through. There are some really quite eclectic faiths that we won't have time to look at tonight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be looking much more at saying why the faiths that have got the larger degree of spread, the larger degree of influence, and start looking at those, and looking at those in particular. Tonight, as I say, with a review of the origins. And if we just go through, I was initially going to look at this in terms of look at the major religions, look at the origins of those religions, look at their view of the Creator, then move on to then, not just the origins but the endings, look at the view of the future, and then the commonality and differences before we come to the conclusions. But due to the size of the challenge, I hope you don't mind, we're just going to spend more time looking at the origins this time before we then look at the faith and the conclusions, maybe on another occasion if you find that of interest. So you can see there that Christianity is by far still nearly double, which surprised me. Surprising those numbers, because Christianity is declining and Islam is increasing in numbers between the two. So Christianity is still the major faith that exists at the moment, with Islam following behind, and Hinduism not too far behind, very concentrated as we know into the India area in particular, with Buddhism coming down quite a long line before you get into Sikhism, and Judaism you can see is really quite small in comparison. So those are the rankings of the large faiths in terms of people who choose to have faith and how they actually follow them. So tonight, as I say, we're going to look at the origins and the views in particular. Taking those figures I showed you in a slightly different way, that's them as a table. So you can see that an interesting thing pops up, if you've not seen it before, therefore, that secular, non-religious, agnostic and atheistic, coming at 1.1 million, is actually one of the largest populations of those people who don't have a faith, or actually I will argue in a moment they do have a faith. So those are the large ones coming down. You can see that Judaism, down here in comparison, Baha'i actually is an extension coming from Zoroastrianism, which is the fourth largest in India. So in India, if you go there, you'll find it's Hinduism and Islam are the two largest faiths. Then Zoroastrianism. What's Zoroastrianism? It's a belief in reincarnation. So it was the first faith that had something in reincarnation. It comes from Persia. So Zoroastrianism was the faith that very much comes from a prophet. We haven't got time to look at him tonight, but he was all very much came about after the time of Christ, but it's all very much the Persian faith that they picked up and followed that way. So those you can see are the major faiths, or if you look at them in a chart, you can then see how we've got a gathering here of some major faiths and a lot of really followers on. That's a cruel way of saying it, but a lot of people who are just don't have the presence against the others. So the ones we're going to be looking at tonight, I'd say, as Christianity, Hinduism, we're going to be looking at in particular tonight, as well as Buddhism, the others, as a summary. But it was interesting why I wasn't able to find any significant European or American religions in their own right. So we've got huge areas of the globe when you think about it. We can see the Chinese faith has got a source. You can see that Islam has got a source. You can see that Judaism has got a source. And we know, in effect, the source of Christianity is Israel. But you don't find anything. You've got the Celtic stuff going on, so there's a little bit of that. But there's no significant European or American religions. They've all very much accepted Christianity as their primary faith to accept. Strange. So, which is the earliest religion then? Because if we take them down in terms of the size, this is following the size of the religions that we've got before. Christianity, the biggest, that comes from 33 AD. Islam comes from 570 AD. So it doesn't start until 600 years after the time of Christ. Sorry, 540 if you take that calendar. So 540 years afterwards, so quite a new faith in comparison to Christianity. Hinduism comes in at 900 before Christ, and there is a slight bit of a disagreement and discussion about how far it goes, but it's all very much in the Vedic, they called it, the Vedic books, and the books aren't there. It's all very much, well, it started about this number of years, but there's no evidence to support when they came from. Most seem to gather that Hinduism only really started as a faith around about 900. Buddhism, 600 years came afterwards. I would suggest from my research that Buddhism was a derivative of Hinduism as it spread. Then Sikhism, very new, and Judaism, the oldest religion. So if we rank these in order of age, you can see that, in fact, the second largest drops right down in terms of being a very new faith in comparison. As such, not going to spend as much time on it tonight, taking a slide out of order, because it's a newer faith in comparison to this talk is about the origin. So when we're starting looking at the origins, we're looking at those that really I'm going to discount Sikhism for the same reason. Christianity is our main focus, so we'll look at that separately. Judaism, Hinduism and Buddhism, they are the ones that had their origin before the time of Christ. Right. If you've got the Lion Handbook, if you remember the good old Lion Handbook that I was given as a Sunday school scholar, these are slides that come from that, and up in the top, that's a picture of my carpet. But you can see, I find this a really very useful slide. You can see, we've got all of these faiths that are coming down here. Christianity, Judaism, Islam, communism, rationalism, humanism, all forms of fertility cults and any forms of Gnosticism coming through here. Jainism, Hinduism, Sikhism, Buddhism, Shintoism, Bahaism, Confucianism and Taoism. All of these start coming back and have an origin point, but you can see they all start to gather. And what it does, if we look and try and focus on the top slide a little bit more carefully, you can see that it really comes to 3 points at the start. 3 points at the start in terms of where they come from. Firstly, Hebrew monotheism, setting down and moving into Judaism here. So the line that we know is pretty well the biblical line. Then the line, as we say, is through Abraham coming down through here. Then you've got Hinduism, which then split into the various forms of the Asian faiths, with its sort of very difficult to find out when its origin was. And then you've got this middle line, and if you look closely inside the middle line, whoops, one slide too early, it says Hittite, Egyptian and Babylonian. And so you've got this gathering going on of the origins of religions being either coming from the God of the Bible, and then you've got the gods of Hittite, Egyptian, Babylonian and the Hinduism gods. What's in common about all of those is they all are polytheistic. They all take a polytheistic stance. And it's quite interesting, I'm finding, because I was just looking this first time, that you've got a line of monotheism and a huge area here of polytheism. And we'll explore that as really the main topic as we're looking forward. Gathering here of the main faiths that express themselves against the God of Israel, Yahweh, was the Hittite, the Egyptians and the Babylonian gods together. So I looked up at the Hittite, and if you look at the origins of the Hittites, why the Hittites? The Hittites were the largest civilized nation which we got records to go back and look. They were incredibly powerful, and they were the first nation who actually had a very large influence in terms of going back in terms of history, earlier in terms of even than Egypt in terms of its political influence. But what does it say? And this is just wiki, not the most authoritative source, but a source that nevertheless you can just accept for a minute. Drawing on Mesopotamian mythology, the religion of the Hittites and whoever the rest are relates noticeably to Indo and European elements. And so therefore it's saying that if you go back to that beginning of the Hittites, they actually influenced the split in terms towards the Indian, therefore the Hindu faiths, and also the European faiths, can all come from that Hittite part. We'll look at that in a bit then later. For example, they talk about how the name of the god of thunder, Tarnut here, is very similar to the name of the Norse god, Thor, and how there are similarities between the serpent, which is a feature in one of the faiths, and therefore the serpent definitely occurs if you enjoyed your Norse mythology at all. But what I noticed also here, this cosmic serpent here in Vedic mythology, Vedic is another word of getting into the Asian faiths a lot. So therefore, this is hanging together for me that the Hittite Empire at the start was very much this pivotal point from which came out this spread of religions saying a different thing. Just observations. And from that comes this various spread in which we've got a lot of religions saying different things. And one of the reasons, therefore, I'm concluding, is one of the reasons that a lot of religions don't say the same thing is because they don't have the same start point and they're looking for different reasons. So therefore, conclusion I got to is religions really fall into three types. There's the monotheistic faith, which is the faith in one, coming from the ancient Greek, theos means God. So those that believe in one God, those that believe in many gods, polytheism, and really, picking up that third largest, we've got atheism. And atheism really, to be honest, it's a faith in its own right. Because there is as much evidence for a God as there is evidence not for a God. It just depends on how you decide to look at it. And I tend to look at it this way, in terms of either you've got faith and you are willing to look beyond what you see at the moment, and as such, if you look carefully, you can probably see there is something in that black, and that black actually has got its own shape. So if you are willing to accept beyond the sight of your eyes and show a little bit of more thinking, then you've got a faith that you can actually see that a vase exists. However, an atheist will see there is no vase. They will only work off what is definitely there, what they can touch, and they will have to have as much faith that there isn't a vase or there is a vase. Is there a vase? Isn't there a vase? It's up to you. It's a matter of faith whether it's a vase or not. And so there are two religions, both have to have a faith. It's just atheism doesn't have a hope. So, back to where we're at. As I said, I think this side's supernumerary now. I'm going to be leaving Islam for this talk because I think it's more relevant to the next one about the endings than the origins, because the major ones we're looking at really are coming out, if you look at this slide, very much that polytheism is the main difference as to why, when you go back to origins, of why religions are saying different things. Let's look at this. So this is showing, if you look at polytheism, how you've got this Odin comes from Norway, Zeus from Greece, Ra from Egypt, Vishnu from India. Matres haven't got a clue. What do they have in common? They all come from this idea of polytheism, this belief in many gods. Many gods, many theism gods. Typically, they are tied to specific events. What I found really interesting when I was working with some Hindu colleagues is that if you are into polytheism, what does polytheism give you? It gives you the ability to choose your own god. So in some areas, the Coug area where I got a few people, they very much were into that god who's got the elephant head. He was the god of luck, and so they very much followed that one. Another area, they very much followed Lakshmi, who was the goddess of beauty. And so you would sort of like pick your god. And I would say to them, well, so you don't eat beef, lamb, what is it, beef? Oh yeah, beef. And they say, well, no, actually, we don't eat anything at all, because our religion says we've got to be totally vegetarian. But the next one would say, well, yes, actually, I'm okay, I can have fish. And then the next one says, but I've got no alcohol. And the next one, there's no actual consistency. The essence of polytheism is very much that you are able to choose the God that you want to identify yourself to the much, which is sort of giving you a lot of free choice. So where's that choice actually coming from? It's just a challenge, isn't it? It's a thought. Just take this for a minute. Polytheism is the belief in worship of many gods. Typically these gods are distinguished by particular functions, often take on human characteristics, particularly true in ancient Greece, Rome, and areas such as Egypt. Gods take on the form and characteristics of objects found in nature, including trees, sacred herbs, cattle, animals, and animal-human hybrids. So that's not me saying it, that's polytheism.net, so therefore, yep, that is their expression of where polytheism comes from. Again, notice, Rome, Egypt, Greece, main areas that polytheism is coming from. Nothing really about Europe or the Americas or Australia. Faith always seems to be coming from the Middle East and spreading out, rather than the out influencing the Middle East. Egypt. The Egyptians' god represent over 50 separate deities, most of which date back to pre-dynastic times, the ancient tribes that made up the religion. So this is still polytheism.net, but notice the language there, the ancient tribes that made up the religion. So very much starting to come across and express how polytheism is those people who choose their faith, who choose the way they wanted to have something to worship. Sounding a bit familiar if we start talking about the Bible now and the fight of God against those people who have their own idols. And so really that's where you start concluding. You can see how the Bible is very much is a fight against God, the single God Yahweh, against man and man's gods as he started to express them. That's my conclusion. If you look at Egypt, if we look at the history of religious beliefs since the earliest human civilizations, it's probably safe to say that all cultures began with some form of polytheism. All. Every early society needed deities to explain all kinds of phenomena, including weather, fertility, food, etc. These people needed to explain different aspects of their lives to everything that needed to be explained, so they could create a god for it. So it's reactive. For most of its recorded history, Egypt was polytheistic. There are many gods, including Sa, Isis, Osiris, Horus, Amun-Ra, etc. Only reason I want to particularly emphasize that is that you'll find that Isis, Osiris, and Horus, they were the first time that Egypt actually then put three gods together and started to clump three gods together. Hold that thought. Now we look at the origin of Hinduism and Buddhism. The website actually covers both at the same time. It's a long one, so I've just cut it at this point in time. But we can see, what about the origin then of Hinduism? Hinduism is a collection of religious beliefs that are developed slowly over a long period of time. This is how they say it goes back to something like 3000, 4000 BC by their writings. Some aspects of the religion can be traced back to ancient times, some. In a Hindu marriage today, for example, the bride and groom marry in the presence of the sacred fire as they did centuries ago. Verses from the Vedas, Vedic, remember that thing about the Hittites, are recited daily by the faithful. Also some non-Aryan gods known as Vedic times, such as Krishna and the Mahabharata, continue to be worshipped. So that's where I got to so far with the thinking and the slides in terms of where we're at. And we'll skip this slide because we've seen it. And really, what we're getting to is, as we say, there is no monotheistic God out there other than Yahweh Elohim, the God of armies. There is no polytheistic super God out there. They're all sort of equal. And there is therefore this balance when you look at the origin of things, in that it's all about whether you start saying there is a God, Yahweh Elohim, and I will follow his ways, or there is this mishmash of gods of all equal levels. Some of them were the originating gods, but they're not as powerful as those that are along the way, that we will choose to follow. And that's not being denigrating. That is the way they present themselves when you look at it. Right, let's just take that. So that was some very heavy stuff for a bit. Let's take a hymn, and we'll just then come back to section 2.
As you can see, it's hymn 94.
So, sorry that was a bit heavy, but I hope it starts getting you thinking and getting you thinking about the different faiths. So therefore, I thought, well, let me try and find this origin through the books and find out how far the books go. And looked around and was trying to find out, well, about how can I find out about how far the books go on the origin of monotheism. And so there's a website I was looking to all about religion, and this shows, therefore down here I got this section that came to, which shows the important dates in history, whoops, there we come, in terms of the origin of religion. And this website, need to research more, but this is as far as I got for now, shows that the first origins of religion in terms of this website goes back to the time of Abraham, monotheism, back to the time of the God of Israel. And so therefore, we can see that we've got the time of Abraham, so therefore what evidence have we got that we got writings about 2000 BC? Challenge. What evidence have we got for books of about 1200 BC, time of Moses? Challenge. The Hindu faith, for all this fact they say they're going back all the way, and it goes back thousands of years, they actually only then claim that they start compiling their texts round about 1100. Interesting. So they actually only start compiling any text at all very recently, so therefore no evidence for anything going back into a strong period. So same with Buddhism, Confucianism, and the Hindu book Bhagavad Gita. So all of those, only 200 BC those, fairly recently written for faiths that say they go back a long, long time. So faiths that have tried to claim that they've got low time, no actual books, references, anything that actually has any depth other than their claims of that it was written down by oral tradition. The first book that they actually talk about of having any form of a written tradition as well as an oral tradition then comes out as being the Bible. Sorry, the Old Testament. Generally accepted that that is one of the earliest. You can see here that it says that the Greeks were the first to actually take a formal interest in history. They were the first people who started cataloguing, and only as around about 1000 BC did they start cataloguing, writing things down. By which time many of the polytheistic faiths from Egypt, from the Hittites, they'd vanished and lost their origins, so no evidence around it. However, we do have the evidence here. I just hadn't come across this before. As I was searching around, this website came up and says, we now have been able to find that a pottery shard from the remains of a town dating from the 10th century BC, therefore 1000 BC, has been proven to be written in ancient Hebrew, making it the oldest known Hebrew inscription. So therefore, we've got evidence of showing that the Hebrews could write. That's a foundation point. But that actually is one of the earliest actually evidenced parts of writing that's come across to be used, going back to 1000 BC rather than since then. Significant individuals, Herodotus is probably known to a few of us that's coming through, but very much the people who documented in the Greeks. So therefore, if we're trying to get back to the origin of religion, there's very little actual foundation. So going to have to then start looking at their claims instead. So let's look at the origins of polytheism. We've looked at that slide. I would suggest this is the first evidence of polytheism. If we've got the Bible as the first written record, we can see that when Laban then was talking to Jacob, he was then starting to draw reference and saying, "Why have you stolen my gods?" By the time of Laban, it was generally accepted that people had gods, small g, polytheism coming across, people wanting to worship their own gods. And they mattered so much to Laban that he chased after Jacob to be able to recover his gods, and as we know that Rebekah was sitting on top of them. When you start thinking about that, you start realising how many gods there are in the Old Testament. All of these are gods that you can see from a reference that you can take and look up as being the gods that our God, Yahweh Elohim, was then fighting against. So Ammon and there you all also, if you then go to Exodus, so the first prime book about, there you've got the formation of the children of Israel through Abraham. They start forming and they want to come out. What was the environment they were coming out against? The God of Egypt. And if you look against each of those 10 plagues, somebody once pointed out to me how each of those 10 plagues were almost a significant point by Yahweh Elohim against the God of Egypt in one particular way, shape or form. He was showing hidden theme. He was showing as he showed the rod, as he showed the frogs, as he showed the flies, showed the boils, how that each of these Egyptian gods were actually of no account. So you actually take this and you start stepping back and you realise that, for me, coming in with a very view that actually I'm in a Christian background, the Old Testament, the huge challenge of the Old Testament was very much this battle between God saying, I am the Lord, there is none else, and everybody else saying, well, I'm going to set up my own gods and follow in my own way. And it really starts coming across, if you want to stand in the one camp or say the origin of my polytheistic God goes back thousands of years, or if you stand in the camp that you accept the Bible, you can see that there is this battle going on between God and man. Man who put in place the polytheistic gods that he wants to follow. Against the system he wanted to be, against the authority he wanted to put in place. Let's take a reading, please, of Psalm 115. That conflict of God saying, you have to make up your mind which camp you're in. You will either follow this object that you have created yourself. You have gone out to the wood and you have moulded it and you've cut it and you've created this thing and you've bowed down and you've worshipped it. Think of Micah in Judges. He set up his own gods. But they'd got no voice. They couldn't speak. They couldn't see. They couldn't hear. And yet they still worshipped him. I had a really weird time in that I went to India and I made a mistake in that we were going and we were doing a bit of tourism bit. And we took people to a local temple. And we went inside and it was a temple to Krishna. And I was with a group of people, and because it was work I was entertaining them. I ended up inside the place. And I was inside the place, and what happened was there were 100 different stones, and you had to step from one stone to the next stone to the next stone as you worked your way through. It was a queuing system basically, and you went through this queuing system of 10 stones by 10 stones. There's 100 of you, worked your way through onto one level, and started following the queue because it doesn't matter. Hinduism is a very inclusive faith and it lets you go inside. So went inside just thinking I was a visitor, but then all of a sudden, about stone 50, they gave me this card. And the card said, please say Krishna, Krishna, Hare Krishna, da 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 da, and you had to start a chant. And you were stuck then with 50 people either side of you. Where were you going to go? So didn't say anything, but the pressure was building. And then you got around to step 100, and behind you, you then got these steps leading up into the actual temple itself. And there was a priest there, and he was whipping the people up, and they were getting louder and they were getting louder, and so you were standing out even more because you were saying absolutely nothing and just shuffling through their place. And it got louder and they got louder as they went up this first set of steps, and it got louder as they got to the second set of steps, louder as we got to the third set of steps, and went into a place which was very much like an Islamic situation in which they were all on the knees and bowing down and coming up in that style of prayer that you probably know what I mean. And there was a 12-inch goldish thing. It was just an effigy. It was like about this size behind a glass panel, and it was sort of a mannish type shape of somebody sitting there in that squat position that was there. And there was this huge whip of emotion to this point that was nothing. And it really hit me of how there was this worship of something that was inanimate, and the essence of God is that you cannot see him because he is so powerful that he doesn't need to be in images. He doesn't need to be there, but he just needs us to open our eyes and see him in the sun, in the moon, and in the stars. And the other thing that came across from me from here is how that, we'll look at this in a few seconds, how that most of these faiths, when you look at them, they all seem to have that origin on land. God draws us back here and says, "Who blessed is the Lord which made the heaven and the earth." Huge amount of all these faiths, they all seem to be. You take Odin and his mob over in Norway, and they're on the top of the mountain. I forget the name of it now, I've gone so bad. You go to, we're going to look at these, let's skip through. Right, sorry, because I'm going out of context. Here, I've found a number of creation myths. Here I found a number of flood myths. Really interesting, you've got flood myths going across actually the whole of the globe, and these are people who've got their own versions of creation. Let's just have a look at their claims of where their creator came from, and you look and say, which of these do you want to start following as your way? The Egyptian one came out of the primal ocean of chaos. So therefore there had to be something before the ocean, but there was an ocean, and an ocean is a land-based mass. At first there was only none, the primal ocean of chaos that contained the beings of everything to come. Then the waters came Ra, who by himself gave birth to Shu and Tefnut, etc. That's Egypt. What about Hinduism? According to the Srimad Bhagavata, I'm going to forgive up there, Brahma was born through Vishnu's navel. Vishnu is the main source of whatsoever exists in the world. What is created as part of his own body. But the point I want to emphasize here is this is the origin of the three-headed or four-headed God. So the formation, the foundation, the earliest records of any three-headed God or four-headed God, it all comes from Hinduism. Where's the second point? Egypt, in terms of you've got coming forward. Then afterwards, three-headed God, its configuration then coming from Christianity of the Trinity. Trinitarianism really is a form of polytheism. It is a form of saying there is no supreme, but there is God the Son, God the Father, and God the Holy Spirit. It is another form of polytheism and actually putting God into a position of polytheism. Just a thought. Fascinating, this one for me. You might have seen this slide, it's 10 years old. How that you've got all of these gods appearing over in the Grecian areas, and here is all the areas in which there are total similarities between Greece and Norway. Why? Why have you got this similarity in opinions between faiths between Greece and Norway? Why have you got two gods of war? Why have you got two gods of archery? Why have you got two dogs that are down in hell? Why have you got two types of people who are controlling your future? Why have you got two supreme beings on a mountain? Both of them on a mountain. Why two goddesses of love? Why do both of these faiths need sustaining food? Why does Eden have to have her golden apples that keep the gods alive? Well, hang on, gods aren't gods if they're mortal, but they do. Eden has to have her golden apples, and we have to have ambrosia. Ambrosia is the food of the gods. So in Olympus, ambrosia was the food that kept the gods sustained. So why is this, and why these distances? An Aztec flood myth. They all seem to agree in a flood myth. It's interesting that, isn't it? They don't seem to have any problem, all of these people, having a very similar flood myth. And how far away were all those places? Oh, I'll have to come back to that slide. There, these are all those places dotted. So there are flood myths agreed by all of these people who've got these very strange, in my opinion, way of expressing their originator in very different ways between them, but they all seem to have this different spread, belief in a flood, going as far away from, this spot here, which Helen will tell me where it is, all the way over to the tip of China. You've got a huge spread of people who all accept a flood within their own beliefs in a God, but they have a different polytheistic God. So why have all of these got a polytheistic God, and only Israel has got the God of the Bible, the God Yahweh? And this is the suggestion that this page came, which I thought was really interesting. Did polytheism actually begin at Babel? Which was the chief nation that came after Babel? The Hittites. So where were the people I'm suggesting the Hittites were that group that were in the major influence, or the people who came afterwards of the Hittites were the people who actually started this, we will stand up against God. And what did God do? He decided he needed to break the languages of people and scatter the people amongst many lands. There is this thought called Pangaea, and this is that the world in one state was one original land mass. Now, I accept that, and I think there's many reasons that that could be the case, and we'll look at just some evidence inside Genesis in a few moments. But if you actually take that as being the land mass, of if the land was all of one mass at the start, then over the top of it, after the time of Noah, the three main sons would have split in those ways. To Shem, Ham and Japheth would have caused their influences over the continents as they moved away from the time of Babel. So then afterwards, and then isn't it interesting? So what you've got is polytheism at the time from each of those areas, Shem, Ham and Japheth, then spread out into the continents, and then afterwards the land was split. And it's just that little bit that's put inside how in Genesis 10 and 11, so we're given it twice for witness, after the time of Eber were born two sons. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided. So I have this theory that I accept, is that what happened was that you got... I'm going to skip this if you don't mind. It's the battle. It's the battle between God, monotheism on the left, and man putting in place his own gods on the right. So that started, in the beginning was God, and then the serpent said, ye shall not surely die. And then following the serpent saying, ye shall not surely die, slowly then Cain decided to follow his way. Cain started to follow his way, and then, Genesis 4, what happened? Men began to call upon the name of the Lord. So people had to decide whether they were going to follow the way of God, monotheism, or follow their own way and put in place their own gods. And from that point, their own gods started to come and to grow. Genesis 7 then, God decided that this had gone too far. It was enough, and now the time had come. So only 8 survived, but start again. So we then get this start again, in which the origin was only Noah and those people that followed the ways of Noah. But very quickly afterwards, the prior experience, the prior training came through. And then when was Babel? We don't exactly know, but it's round about this time here. So then God then scattered them abroad. And so, God then scattered them abroad. So you've got the monotheistic faith dwindling ever since that point, and slowly polytheism and atheism standing up against it. So the fight of God, and our finishing thoughts, are this is what God is saying. You have a choice. Why do all religions not say the same thing? Because it's the choice of whether you follow the way of God or the way of man. Therefore, this is why God is saying, I am the Lord, there is none else. There is no God beside me. Look at what he's trying to say. Follow my way and not the way of polytheism. That they may know from the rising of the sun in the west, there is none beside me. I am the Lord. I form the light. I create darkness. I make peace. I create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. See now that I, even I, am he, and there is no God with me. I kill and I make alive. It's so powerful when you think of it this way, that that's what the battle of the Old Testament is. Now these are the commandments, the statutes and the judgments the Lord your God commanded to teach you, that you might do them in the land whither you go to possess. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one Lord. For all the gods of the nations are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. For all the gods of the people are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. Sorry, let's repeat. To whom will you liken God, and what will you compare unto him? The workman melteth the graven image, and the goldsmith spreadeth it over with gold, and casteth silver chains. For though they be that are called gods, whether in heaven or earth, as there be gods many and lords many, but to us there is but one God, the Father. What say I then? That the idol is anything. A huge message being given us of the origin of why faiths are so different is because of this choice of who I want to serve rather than the God of Israel. That's the number of times I was able to look at instances in which God was taking on polytheism and was asking us to address the situation of people taking their own gods. This is the number of times in which words related to idols, idolatry, graven image, Asherah, which is the goddess of sex, the groves, the gods, the ephods, the teraphims, all of these were people taking their own perversions rather than following the way of God. So really, religions, as we started saying, fall into three types: monotheism, polytheism and atheism. It's the God of the Bible, as opposed to the God that you choose in your own mind to follow, as opposed to no God at all, humanism, saying humanism is the only way I wish to follow things. And those are the choices. And all religions say the same things. Those are the three fundamental choices. And I would say what we've come to is that it's the God of the Bible or the way of man. Whether it's polytheism as atheism, it's still the way of man and your choice as to whether you want to take the same thing. So it falls down to a black and white choice. Because it's either you follow the respect of the God who created the heaven and the earth and follow the way and His word is authenticated as being true, or whether you actually go back and say, I will actually say my own thing and follow my own way. And that's why all religions don't say the same thing, because everybody's got a different opinion and has no respect for an ultimate being. And Elijah came to the people and said, how long halt you between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him, but if Baal, then follow him. And the choice isn't a complicated choice, it's quite a simple choice between whose way you want to follow, your way or God's way. But to us there is but one God, the Father, of whom are all things, and we in him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, by whom are all things, and we by him. So the first part that we've looked at, I think, comes down to a very simple choice between the way of God and the way of man. There is one body and one spirit, even as you called in one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in you all. Thank you.